Hello, everyone, and welcome to Booktrib Live, a Merrill Moss Media production. Joining us today is New York Times bestselling author and relationships expert Alan C. Fox. Alan's first two books, People Tools and People Tools for Business, have inspired thousands using his time-tested tools for achieving success in all aspects of life. His latest book, People Tools for Love and Relationships, The Journey from Me to Us, explores Alan's techniques for enhancing connections with life partners, friends, family, and everyone who's important to you in your life. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Alan. Before we begin, do you mind giving our audience a quick introduction to People Tools for Love and Relationships, just for any of our viewers who haven't gotten the chance to read it yet?
Well, People Tools for Love and Relationships is how to do relationships. It's something that we're not taught in school. We just kind of pick up from our families and from our friends on the playground. I think there are good ways to learn things, and I think one good way is to read books on self-help and learn some techniques. I've always said experience is the best teacher, preferably somebody else's experience. I don't want to make the same mistakes that other people have made. So read People Tools and you'll learn about my mistakes and perhaps you won't make them yourself.
That's a really interesting outlook to have on self-help books. But yeah, just to start off with our first question, what made you want to tackle the subject of love and relationships, seeing as how your last books are more about life in general and business? What sparked that shift to want to speak about this particular issue?
Absolutely. Actually, although I have an undergraduate degree in business, I've always been interested in relationships, and I have a master's degree in counseling. I went back to school and got that because I wasn't happy with the way I was dealing with other people. For one thing, I always had to be perfect. I wasn't well liked in my law office when I was practicing law by my employees. And so I've always been interested in both. And when you think about it, relationships are an important part of your life, whether it's a love relationship or business. I think many of the same ideas and techniques to make it really work well apply.
Wow, so are the rules in this book very similar to some of the rules in your previous books, or are they completely different, or what's the difference there?
No, rules and People Tools for Relationships focus on relationships totally. Although all the tools, some of them, for example, in one of my first books, Sunk Cost Idea, what's past is past. Well, that is a business concept, meaning if you spend a lot of money for a machine, but you have a better one you can buy today and make your business run more profitably, you do it. In life, if you paid for a ticket to a movie and you don't like the movie, do you really want to invest another hour and a half watching a movie you don't like? I say, get up and leave. So I think the tools for dealing with your own thought process apply across the board, notably in business, but in People Tools for Love and Relationships, it's really mostly on relationships and how to get along with an intimate partner.
Well, do you advise, I mean, you were just talking about, okay, if you've already spent the money on something and you're not enjoying it, get out of there. Do you feel the same way about relationships to a certain extent?
I think, you know, one of the stories I like best from People Tools for Love and Relationships is chapter 4, Be the Right Person. Now, I grew up with the idea that you grow up, fall in love, get married, have children, and live happily ever after.
Mhm.
Now, that didn't happen for me. What was wrong? Well, obviously, I picked the wrong person. So throw out the first person, get another one. And if that doesn't work, throw out the second one, get a third one. At some point, you have to realize that each of us has responsibility for making a relationship work. So I say you have to learn how to be the right person in a relationship to make it work. It does not happen automatically.
Mhm. That's a really important thing to know, and I wish I knew more about. But yeah, I mean, you just discussed, the idea of having multiple partners in your life. I mean, is that a big part of the book that you expound on? I mean, is that, I know you have mentioned that you have a degree in counseling, but I mean, you talk about drawing experience from your previous relationships. Is that a huge part of your background that's informed this book and some of your previous work as well?
Absolutely. I think, like anything else, I can't see you anymore. Get Lauren, please. Get Lauren, please.
Still there? Hello? Can you hear me?
Does that mean anything? Ah, okay. I'm sorry, I just lost you. So would you ask that last question, please?
Oh yeah. So you can hear me and we're good now? Good.
Yeah,
Great. I had just
yeah, we're
asked
okay.
about the idea of, your background being incorporated into your book and, some of your past relationships, how they have informed the book. And I think you had kind of gotten halfway towards answering it.
Well, I think like anything else, as I said before, experience is the best teacher. You learn by experience, and you can learn by your experience or other people's experiences. Certainly, I'm 76 years old. I've had a lot of experience in relationships. I've had a number of outstanding relationships. Some relationships didn't work too well. And again, returning to what I just said, it's not a matter of finding the right person and everything's going to be happily ever after. It's a matter of being the right person and working on a relationship.
Well, as a,
For example, one thing. I'm sorry.
oh,
Go
you go
ahead.
ahead. You finish saying what you're going to say.
Okay. One thing I find in relationships that really gets away is hidden agendas. In other words, if your partner does something you don't like, your partner takes off his or her clothes and throws them on the floor and just leaves them there, and you trip on them in the middle of the night. Not too much fun. If you don't say anything, you just get more and more angry about the situation. It's hidden. The agenda to get them to change is hidden. Or you might make hints. Oh, isn't being neat nice? Well, I think you have to be clear, direct, and specific in a relationship because a hidden agenda is like an infection. If you don't treat it, it gets worse and worse and worse. And so I think that's the sort of thing that is important. What I have learned in relationships, it's not automatic. You have to think about it and pay attention all the time.
Yeah, I saw your most recent blog post on that very topic. And one thing I wanted to ask you is, are those hidden agendas or that idea of people having a fantasy about having a perfect relationship and a perfect life, are those two of the biggest challenges that you see for people between each other and having partnerships, or is there a bigger issue that you've encountered as a relationship expert that people need to tackle?
I think that one of the biggest problems in relationships that you do have to tackle is what I think of as unrealistic expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And what you just talked about is one of them. Perfection. It's going to be perfect every day of your life. The other person is going to be perfect, is going to do everything I want all the time. We'll love going to the same movies. We'll want to go to the same vacations. We'll want to do exactly the same thing that I do all the time. And I think that's a very unrealistic expectation. I think you have to allow other people to have their own lives as they did before you met. And we all have different needs and different, for example, something couples don't talk about is what time do you like to go to bed? If I want to go to bed at 9 p.m. and you want to stay up until 2 a.m., that can be a problem if you like going to bed together. And, things like that, I think we don't talk about. Um, uh, my uh, my first wife was very clear about um, she didn't like to cook. Well, that was important to me, but she was very upfront about it, and we did fine. That was not a problem. But you have to be upfront about what you like and what you don't like and who you are, and let the other person know that.
Well, I think clarity is really important too, and that's one thing that I learned from you know, getting to know this book. But one thing that you mentioned was the idea of having separate lives. And one of the relationship issues that I know between my friends and that I've experienced is the idea of having separate lives with your friends from your partner. How do you think is the best way to broach that sort of difference where I want to hang out with my friends, we have different friends, it can sometimes cause some friction. So what's your advice in that situation?
I think that is something which should be discussed. I think it's very individual. I know couples who actually have worked together for 30 or 35 years. They are together 24/7 and it works just fine. I know other couples where one or the other of them is away on business or on meditation groups for 10 days a month. I know couples who are bicoastal. One lives in Los Angeles, one lives in New York. They get together on weekends or every other weekend. I think that's a very individual matter and depends on what each want. In other words, I have the concept of emotional closeness and how close do you want to be? And what does that mean in terms of how much time you want to spend together? And I tend to want to spend a lot of time together. So I need to be with someone who also wants to spend a lot of time together. Now, every minute of every day, not for me. That doesn't work. I want to have lunch perhaps with some of my friends. My partner wants to have lunch with her friends or go work out in the morning or in the afternoon. So, as Khalil Gibran said in The Prophet, let there be spaces in your togetherness. And I think that's very important for most of us.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and that's a great quote. Um, like jumping off that question, how do you think that the age of social media and technology has affected that idea of emotional closeness? The idea that you can be with somebody but not be physically with somebody, like in person all the time. How do you think that's affected the way we think about relationships?
Well, I'm not an expert about teenagers doing that, but it seems to me I like texting, I like emails, I like all that stuff. For me, texting is a great way to keep in touch during the day, without having to pick up the phone, wait for a phone call. Hi, how are you? Go through that stuff, etc. Just hi, thinking of you, whatever. The emojis are very nice to put on them. I have an agreement with my partner that she always gets the last word, so that you know when to stop. I don't, you can't. When do you stop? I mean, oh, she didn't answer me. Has she lost interest? Well, you know, have a deal so that you know what's going on. But I don't think technology really. I don't think it really hurts. It can, like anything, it can be misused. Um, Food can be misused. You can just drink celery juice for your entire meals.
Ooh,
So I think technology is very helpful actually, and can enhance relationships.
cool. I thought that you might say something differently, but that's really interesting and a good insight to have. Um, Moving on to a different sort of question. One of the things that I was wondering is if you would give the same advice to a long-term couple or as you would to a short-term couple rather, like what are the different challenges associated with those two kinds of relationships and how do those challenges change as they transition from one to the other?
I would say in terms of new couples and long-term couples, my advice would be exactly the same. First, be nice, be kind to each other. Be considerate. That is very, very important. Well, some people get the idea that I got to kind of tear you down a little bit so you'll need me more. I don't have that idea at all. I will compliment my partner when they do something well. Um, one woman I was with really didn't own her intelligence, and I said to her whenever she did something smart, I said to her for a long time, I said, that's really smart. Good for you. And after a year and a half, she looked at me. She said, Alan, I know what you're doing, and it's working. So my first thing is be nice. Second, pay attention. To me, my wife is the number one priority in my life, above my children. I once had an argument with my father because he wrote a very, very nasty letter to my wife. I said, Dad, if I'm going to have to choose between you and my wife, I'm going to choose my wife. So, a word to the wise, just get along. And Uh, and the tendency is in long-term relationships to take the other person for granted. Oh, they've been there so long, they'll always be there. No problem. I don't have to pay as much attention. Look, in business, my business is very important to me, and I always pay attention. And I think that when you stop paying attention, you start taking a person or a business or driving for granted. It's like on driving. You always pay attention. I tell my children, for example, that if you zone out in class for 15 minutes, so you won't do quite as well on a test. If you zone out for 5 seconds driving, you could be dead or injured. In relationships, maybe you can take a vacation for 5 or 10 minutes, but I think it's important to be romantic, give your partner flowers from time to time, and really pay attention to their needs and let them know that you care. And it's just as important if you've been together for 50 years, and my parents were married for 52 years, as it is with someone you just met.
Wow, I never made that connection between, paying attention in driving and paying attention in relationships. That's a really interesting concept, and I like that a lot. I have another question I wanted to ask you, which is, Can you talk a little bit about the concept of a get out of jail practically free card? I thought that was a really interesting concept, and I'd love for you to share it with some of our viewers.
Sure. Well, the idea comes from the game of Monopoly, which I used to enjoy. You know, get out of jail free. If you land on the wrong place, you go to jail. Okay. The get out of jail practically free concept is actually two things. First, get out of jail. In other words, don't hold grudges. Your partner did something you don't like. Maybe it was awful. Maybe it was something small, like they forgot to bring something home from the grocery store. Talk to them about it and let it go. So let them out of jail. The practically free part is that there are some things that you don't want to have happen over and over and over. So there are conditions. That's not, oh dear, you did this and I really don't like it, but keep on doing it forever. I just won't like it forever, but I love you anyway. I don't think that works too well. So I'm saying, tell your partner what you want or what you don't want. And there are a few things to me, such as physical abuse or emotional abuse, that are not okay. And for those, I would say there is no get out of jail free card. Hitting people is just not okay and should not be acceptable.
I completely agree, and I'm sure everybody does too. So I hope that.
Yeah.
But let me go ahead and put up a question from one of our viewers, because they can write questions. So anybody who's watching, if you want to have your question put on the screen, just write it down below. And here's a question from Kate. Is it true that you were shy and afraid of rejection before you mastered people tools? And what gave you that push? It's a great question. So thanks, Kate.
Well, that's a wonderful question, and that's probably what drove me to people tools. The reason I went back to school to get a degree in counseling is because I was shy. And I was phobic about meeting strangers. I didn't know what to do. And I was nervous, and it was a big problem in my life. The one thing I learned after 2 years of taking classes and practicing and going to encounter groups, whatever, was to be open. It's okay to say, I'm really feeling shy. I'm feeling scared. And, in terms of being open, when I was 16 years old, I was at the American Legion-sponsored Boys State in Sacramento. And a friend of mine, a classmate at my high school, who later went to Caltech, ran for state treasurer. And he got up before 600 16-year-old boys, and he gave this wonderful speech with big words and high concepts, and I just loved it. And his opponent then got up to talk, and his hands were visibly shaking as he approached the lectern on the stage. And I thought, we've got this made. And his hands are shaking, and he looks into this crowd of boys, and he says, I'm scared. And the audience erupts into applause. And he won the election in a landslide because he was honest. So I think people will forgive you for being honest. They want to know what's going on. And yes, you can be scared, but you can pretend not to be, or you can just say, I'm scared. And that's one way of breaking the ice and contacting another person and starting a good relationship.
Wow, that's a great story. I love that anecdote, and it's a great piece of advice too. That's really fantastic.
Thank you.
But let me move on to another one of my questions now. Do you think that we should be taught about relationships and relationship skills in school? And building bonds are a backbone of any society, so why not teach them in school? I mean, what do you feel about this? And if you think that we should have schools teach relationship skills, how do you see that class forming? How do you see that taking place?
Well, that's another very good question. In terms of what we learn in school, obviously schools have limited time and they have to teach certain things. I think reading you're not going to pick up on your own, although some people do. Arithmetic and other subjects I think are mandatory. However, schools, when they cut back, they cut out art, they cut out music, and not too many schools have courses in relationships. They just leave that to people to learn or you learn with your friends, you learn with your family. But each family has certain things that maybe aren't the best. I remember when I was 16, I met the woman who was became my first wife, and she came to have dinner at my house. And we didn't know about paper napkins. We had a dish towel. So you wiped your mouth on the dish towel and you pass it along to the next person. They wiped their mouth. Well, she was horrified. I mean, most people don't do it that way. My family did. I didn't know any different. So, in terms of techniques in my family, only my father could get angry. Nobody else could raise their voice because he didn't like that. Another thing that in my life, my father, when he was asked something that he was uncomfortable with, that he didn't want to do, he would just get very angry. So I learned that it was not okay to ask. And I had to learn when I went back to school that it is okay to ask, and it's also okay to say no. So you don't have to give everybody everything just because they've asked. Now, that's something I had to learn in school. I did not learn that from my friends. I did not learn that from my family growing up. So I think that schools, this information is available. It's available in People Tools. It's available in any one of a number of books. Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, was published, I believe, in 1936, almost 100 years ago. The information is timeless, and if you want it, it's there in books, but I think it's an important enough subject. Because let's face it, you will do well in life if you get along with people. And that's, I think, the most important single skill to have. I knew a woman who was a student at UCLA years ago, and I don't know how she got even C's in order to stay in school, but she was a wonderful person. Everybody wanted to spend time with her. She was great at giving parties. Everyone loved her. I think that is a very important skill. Some of us have it, and most of us, have to learn it. And so I think school is a good place to make that happen.
Really good answer. I think it's one of those things that maybe more people don't think about, but when you actually think about it, it's a great idea. It just seems like basic information, but so many people lack it right off the bat. It should definitely be a thing in schools. Yeah, I think it's a great point to make. Yeah, another question I wanted to ask you about something in the book is that you mentioned the topic of money and how to discuss this rather with your partner. It's going to be a really delicate subject, and you have some tips for how to bring up financial issues in a relationship. So could you share maybe a tip or two with our viewers about how to discuss that really sort of delicate issue?
Sure. In terms of talking about money, um, I've always been interested in money, and fortunately, in my family, we talked about money. And how much does my father earn? He bought an apartment building. How did that work? I remember meeting a woman once at a party, and she was very excited about a new job. And I said, "Oh, that's great. How much do you earn?" And she looked at me. She said, "Oh, Alan, I wouldn't even tell my mother that." I said, "Yeah, okay, I won't tell your mother either. So how much do you earn?" And she told me.
Good answer.
I think that when we're comfortable with a subject, that we can talk about it more easily. And in business, I need to know what salaries are. I deal in real estate. I got to know what prices are. I can't fly blind. And money is an area, along with sex, which many families do not talk about. It's just verboten. You won't talk about it. So you have to learn out by yourself. And I think that's a big disadvantage, particularly with money, because I know so many people who just have never learned. And a lot of people make a mistake. They say, I'm not good with money. I'm dumb with money. I'm stupid with money. No, no, you're ignorant about money. You haven't learned about it. I know a fellow who was a CFO for a major corporation. And he told me the story. He said when he was 20 years old, he got into trouble with his credit cards. He owed $20,000 all of a sudden. He's probably earning $10,000 a year. And the credit card companies are very professional. They're very seductive. They know how to get you to spend money. And he came to his boss and he said, I think I can negotiate a discount on my credit cards. I got to borrow money from you to do that. And he did. He paid off his credit cards, and as far as I know, he's been great with it ever since. But the point is that even someone who is now terrific with money and knows taxation and knows all the rules at age 40 didn't when he was 20 years old.
Mhm.
So if your family isn't comfortable talking about money, I suggest taking classes and talking with people who are comfortable talking about money. You have to get over your shyness and be able to talk about it, and it's not something that to me it's not something that should be hidden. It's it's something that's fun to talk about as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Just if you never talked to anybody about how to do your hair, I guess you wouldn't know. So, there you go.
No, that's a great point, and I completely agree for what it's worth. But just we're kind of getting close to the end of the chat, and I just want to ask, what's the main point that you hope readers can take away from People Tools for Love and Relationships? Like, if we need to have one takeaway, like, what's the main thing that you want people to know?
The main thing I would like people to take away from People Tools is this idea. Set aside the idea that someone else is going to save you, that you're a victim.
Mm-hmm.
We all go to a doctor, and we want him to give us a shot or a pill, and we're cured like magic. There is no magic. And the biggest tool you can take away is the idea that success in your life and success in relationships is up to you.
Mm-hmm.
You can make a difference. You do make a difference. So take it upon yourself and believe that you can and will have a successful life and get along well with people. When you do that and you are determined and you practice it, you will get very good at it and you'll do much better than you do today.
And also learn from other people's experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not?
Yeah.
For sure.
I also want to ask you, are you working on anything new? I mean, what's next for you? Is there another form of People Tools that we're going to get to learn all about at some point in the future? Or, I mean, what's your current project?
Yes, I'm working on two things. Well, three things actually. I'm working on a children's
Oh,
book
great.
because I have an affinity for children and I have some stories from when I was young. And I'm working also. I think the next People Tools, which will probably come out in a year or two, is People Tools for families. In other words, how to raise children, how to get along with your children. And I think being encouraging and positive is important. I think communication with teenage children is a challenge for most parents because teenagers, your job is to become independent and break away. Parents' job, they met you when you were a baby and you needed to be fed, and parents don't let go of that too easily. So I'm very much into that. I have 6 children,
Wow.
so that's one thing that I may do.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, I'd read that book. It sounds really interesting. And I didn't know you had 6 children. Jeez, that's a lot of work. Yeah,
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And a lot of fun, too. It's very rewarding.
fantastic. And sort of my concluding question, which is always something that I like to end with, is what are you currently reading? Like, what's on your book list?
Currently reading. Well, I read the New York Times a lot because I like to keep up to date. I read psychology books. Can't think of what I've read real recently because I mostly try to keep current on the news and keep up to date on the facts that are going on. I think that's important in business, relationships. I follow politics. I think that's more interesting today than it has been in the past because Donald Trump is totally unorthodox and been much more successful than anyone thought he would. Well, than many people thought he would be. I find that very
It
interesting.
is interesting, and he certainly has his own version of some People Tools that he's been using. But yeah,
Yes.
and you're right, it's really, really interesting. So yeah, that's the end of our chat. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Please be sure to check out People Tools for Love and Relationships. And Alan, thank you so much for being with us. I hope you join us again soon. And yeah, have a great rest of your night and afternoon.
Thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye.